Yeah, all good.
All right. Good stuff. So I wanted to just really quickly start and just give a update on last week. Sorry we were out. Had a big unfun time. One of my best friends that I've known since we were little kids. He had an accident on Wednesday and then didn't make it on Friday. So obviously was not in much of a mood by the time I got back here Saturday to chat and all that stuff. But it has made me rethink things and get super motivated because, I mean, we had lots of plans of things we were going to do, and now we can't do those things. So all of my longer term plans are getting pushed and kind of pulled in, and feeling more and more urgency to do interesting and exciting stuff and get all of the stuff that I want to do, and just kind of remind everybody else too. So if you got a friend that you haven't talked to in a while, make sure you call them up after this at least. Not that was the case there. I used to talk to him like every other day, which really sucks. So anyway, how was everybody else's last week? I assume relatively positive.
Compared to that, yeah.
Yeah. Quite good, working on finalizing new RAM version.
Awesome. How close are we to the latest river material?
Few weeks.
Nice. And that's what you're showing back behind you right there?
Nope. This one I'm showing behind me is Autumn Valley. I kind of think I can hook up.
I thought I saw a stream right there. I thought maybe you're doing streams. You have to show us that. And this is for anybody who's not familiar with it. Powell, this nature manufacturer on the asset store, amazing 3D art assets for games that are all realistic, and the river auto material and the lava version of it and all that cool stuff. So it's a really, really awesome stuff. And it's all linked down in the description too, so you can go check it out.
Yeah, I think I can make a quick.
It would be cool to see what the latest one is. You get it up. Well, let's full screen it real quick. Everybody can get an idea of what it is that you're working on and why it's awesome.
Yeah. So this is our new. Do you see it?
No, I see a black screen. It looks amazing. Yeah. Is it Outer Space Simulator?
No. OBS is just making problems as always. Let me just give it one second.
To fix. Oh, well, thanks, Dustin. Memberships for 5 people. Awesome.
Oh, yeah.
Congrats. Oh, very cool.
Yeah. So this is a new demo scene. One thing that showed up in it is new sea asset. It's mostly by coastlines, not open seas, but it works great with our other assets. It takes, as you can see, it not only generates waves towards the beach, but it also curves them depending what kind of area is there. So you can see that the main wind is blowing towards the beaches, but now here you have small waves coming to this one.
Oh, that's cool. How is the setup for that? Is it?
You just set up the main direction of the waves, and it automatically calculates what are the different elements, shores, some islands, and it just gives some additional waves to them.
Will that influence things with physics? Like if there's something floating on the water, will they move in the direction of the waves?
Mostly they should, yeah, but that's one of the things that we are still working on.
Wow. That is really cool. And then do you have a view of the rivers showing in here too?
Yeah, the rivers were updated. We have new shaders for them. Especially you can now change them vertically if you want to make some kinds of poofs like here, that the water is accumulating when it's lot of them in one thing. And last thing, this is just for showcasing it today, is we are adding new tool for generating additional waterfalls. So if I just remove them.
Oh, wow.
So you can
And just get a nice, pretty waterfall.
And what's cool about this one, it takes into account how the terrain is moving and it flows with the terrain.
So it doesn't just fall flat down and clip right through?
No, it just goes with the terrain. You can quickly showcase it with the debug. It checks how the terrain is going and it accumulates in some areas.
Yeah, that is definitely cool.
And it works correctly with all our other stuff, like my favorite paintings. So you can change the style of the shader if you don't want it to be.
Yeah.
If you want to be crispy, clear, yeah, rather than having some kind of splashes.
Dustin is calling you out in the comments. Hey, no, dog, you can't do that. She wants on my lap. He's calling you out in the comments for.
Yeah, I see.
Yeah, that's a great sign for me too.
Yeah, with the waterfall, you can showcase the new kinds of connections between lakes and rivers. Yeah, so you can have something more accumulated. And what's one more cool thing we added to the lake? Mostly it's with the lake, but it comes with our. It also was in LVE 2023 because it's using the same engine as this one. So all updates from this one will go to back to lava, but we didn't showcase it mostly. So if you break your terrain, you can use our lakes and finally, to be truthful, all of our splines, because all of our system was moved to new spline system that we use. It's our own system rather than Unity's, as Unity was breaking to us too much. And with it, you have multi-layered terrain painting, so you can paint your terrain with just one click.
Oh, cool. So this will all work in the LVE as soon as it comes out too? Or is it a little bit delayed?
Yeah. It should be 1 week delay because we have to just make all the versions of Unity updated. Yeah, so we have to go to 2000 because this one will be 2022 up, and we have to update with LVE 2022, 2023, and the Unity 6 versions. So.
Nice. Well, that'll be really cool. Everybody should check it out. Like I said, there's a link in the description, but we need to put a link for RAM 23 too, because I think it's just a general nature manufacturer link.
Yeah,
it's awesome. Well, there are a couple of topics that I wanted to make sure that we get to today, and I wanted to let you all pick which one first. So there were 3 that I dropped into the Discord earlier. One was about remote work and working in remote offices, which I think is pretty interesting. It was a story about a team that essentially used one of the tools that I really like to do their remote office and how that worked out. It was a post from Uncle Bob about performance and programmer time versus computer time, which I thought was pretty interesting as well. And then we did have a resume we might take a look at. And also the crazy GameStop stuff is back again. I don't know if you guys saw that. Made a couple dollars on Thursday and then just kind of watched the madness. It was interesting. But anybody have a preference on where to start? And welcome, Lon. How's it going?
Yeah.
Story.
You know me, I'll talk about absolutely anything for too much, people say. So I always let everyone else pick the topics because I'll just fill in the gaps.
All right. Anybody in chat have a preference? We can always wait for the first person in chat to reply and pick. Or if any of you guys have a preference on where we start. So there's a lot, and I've got a big old fat dog right up on my lap. All right, we'll start with yes. All right, let's just screen share. And we'll start with
remote. Yeah, I was going to bring up remote.
Yes, remote offices. So here's the article. I'm going to drop it in chat too for anybody who wants to kind of read along and follow along. But maybe we should just read out the first paragraph or so. It says, yes, we're heretics, and an affront to the remote work ethos, which repeatedly says you should be communicating asynchronously. The thing is, we tried async for years because it enabled us to work across continents. We just got so tired of spreading decision making out over days and weeks and then cramming all the complex collaborative work into 2 hours of overlap and then skipping dinner to get 1 more hour. Tired of having wickedly smart interns and new hires, but knowing that they weren't getting the hands-on proactive onboarding experience that they really deserved, and mostly tired of not having room to have fun together. And then they go on about wanting to have fun, and it's a long article, but they essentially switched over to using Gather for their remote office and for collaboration and communication, which I think is what it's kind of really good for outside of online conference type events, but it's not an easy thing to kind of convince people of. And I'm really curious where you all are on this. I've worked remote plenty in the past, and there are a lot of very common problems, and this article calls them out. The fact that you're delaying decision making constantly because everything is, we'll do this in this meeting, we'll decide in this meeting, we'll make this decision in this call. Or it's back and forth messages through Slack. Things tend to go quite a bit slower than when you're just sitting there in person. But like Felipe calls out, there's definitely a balance issue there too, because if you're in an online office the entire time, 24/7, it is somewhat similar to being in an in-person office, which again has a lot of benefits, does have the drawback of you can't just randomly disappear for multiple hours, but I don't know that that's a good positive benefit of the alternative. So yeah, I'm curious, anybody have initial strong thoughts on this before we go too deep?
Yeah, I haven't read the whole article, so I'm just curious how it would work exactly, because most of my time is spent looking at code on my computer. And I mean, I guess I could have Gather up on another monitor.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the premise, I guess, to kind of elaborate a bit here, because I think it's not really explained well, is that in traditional work environments, you're normally split into one of sort of 3 camps. You're either off doing your own thing, and then you sort of meet up unscheduled once a week, once or whatever. You have the second camp, which is more, you are an integrated team, and so you have some sort of like morning call, maybe even an end of day call, but for the most part, you kind of work to your own thing. And there's often like a live Slack or some group chat that means you can keep in touch, but you're not effectively being bothered. And then the third kind is sort of a more integrated working type scenario. And previously tools would be like Zoom or Discord, people might just have one running and they're basically all in the room and they'd muted. But that's a little bit frustrating because the implication is it's a live call and you sort of feel like you're constantly on stage. You're like sitting there and there's people sort of, you end up having to feel like you want to announce yourself every time you want to go to the bathroom, and it starts to be a bit silly at that stage. So the argument or the promise of something like Gather is to say the implication here is that you're sort of, your radius of talking is like a video game. It's not actually all of the time, it's just around your table. And so there's literally some level of work and visible indication of someone walking over to you. And so the idea would be is imagine Discord, but you're not in it all the time. And if you walk away, you can kind of like bake back in some of that social norms of walking around and not having to sort of be there constantly and sort of feel like you're in this sort of hub. That's at least the philosophy. My argument is a bit more, I guess the way I'd phrase it is a lot of this is overwrought and over-explained for what boils down to a much simpler point, which is if you feel like your colleagues are going to be helpful to you, you want to be in fast communication with them. If you feel like they're going to be a hindrance, you don't. And so the fact of the matter is, and this isn't like about any one person or anything in particular, the fact of the matter is if you are in a kind of more conversational job, if your job is about product design or you're dealing with any level of people management or expectations or any of that stuff, having quick access to everybody is fantastic. Like for you, that's a major benefit. If you're a programmer and you're dealing with people who are on business side wanting to ask you questions about what can or can't be done tech-wise, For them, that's brilliant. For you, that's horrible, because that's constant distractions that'll break your progress. If you're a programmer and you're working on isolated systems, other programmers are a pain in the ass, because they're either junior to you and asking lots of questions, or they're senior to you and then you feel either you don't want to bother them, or you're working on different stuff anyway, and so there's no benefit. So all of this is just various ways of phrasing the same thing, which is, if you are tightly working with people, you want fast communication. If you're not, you don't. And having a culture that has more communication faster is probably a good thing. And the only people who want people to work entirely remotely are people who, quite frankly, either don't like their team or don't like the project. And so they're trying to find less and less ways to engage with it. That's fact. And if you actually care about the project or the work, you'll want to get you want to have more communication. Where that line is for you is a lot to do with your own social skills, or your job, and how people facing you are, and how much rapid turnaround information is for you versus how much is off problem solving. So I think, again, something like this is sort of a broad overcorrection, I think, because it doesn't really work for what its goal is, which is, the real problem is that people don't understand that there's different categories of people in a problem. There are people who are trying to solve thinking problems. There's people who are trying to solve concept or philosophy problems, and each of these groups should meet up, and they should meet up regularly, but they should do so in ways that are conducive to each problem. So to me, the answer isn't an always active workspace. It is a culture of certain either modes, places, or times where different groups are enforced to meet up in such a way that they will contribute in ways that make sense, and not just throw everyone in a box together and try to solve problems, because there's too many variables in that means that some people won't use it, some people will be overzealous, and some people will feel like they have to run around everyone's desk all the time, and it just becomes this whole thing that is just too much noise rather than help, in my opinion.
No, I think that's a very, very solid argument. And I mean, I kind of agree. I feel like the benefit is there if it was really done and used right by like a small group of people, but it has the same downside, like the same really strong negative of constant interruption. When you're working in an in-person office, depending on the company that you're working at and the games that you're working on, you can have scenarios where you're just interrupted like every half hour. You're interrupted every hour. And half of those times it's totally not even work related. It's just somebody came by to ask you about something, tell you about something that happened or whatever else. And that is something that you don't get with the asynchronous side, right? If you're in Slack and Discord, those distractions, like they're not distracting because it's like, oh, somebody's talking about something else. I don't have to engage in that. But if they come into your office or into your cube section and just start talking to you about it, then it certainly is distracting. I will
say that my hot take on that, though, just to point out, is that I made it sound like, oh yeah, I'm mostly in agreement these are a bad idea. But I will say I am hyper suspicious of anyone I work with who talks about the idea of offices as a bad idea. Anybody who says that that everyone should work remote or whatever, I'm hyper suspicious of, because the truth is, anybody who's really worked on a project, they truly want to succeed, wanted to communicate with their colleagues. Legitimately, because there's way too many levels of that where you actually want stuff to work. You acknowledge that sometimes you have to cut that out, and the time savings are immense. It's not just the cost of an email, it is the turnaround time on a problem or engaging with stuff. But the answer isn't none or the other. My answer personally is office hours, is very clearly saying between the hours of X and Y, I'm acknowledging I'm free to be interrupted. I'll like put my less stress work there, and I'll do the real work with non-office hours. And that way everybody is very clear that there's no like surprises, but lets you do both. But yeah, I just to say that any dev whose instant reaction is, oh, stuff like this is horrible, corporate mandate stuff, it's like, well, then that just telegraphs to me that you don't actually care about the project at all. And that's fair. Sometimes I don't either. But the fact is, it's like the whole point of this is that if you actually care, having communication truly, truly matters. And you have to engage with it on both sides.
Yeah. I always put on my calendar a block of time called focus. Actually, we have a shared technology calendar, so I always put Greg-focus there so people know, don't schedule meetings with me during this time. That's when I'm heads down.
Yeah.
Don't bother me. One thing I will say is we had a hackathon a while back, and those of us that were working on the same hackathon project, we all did pair programming or mob programming. We use Zoom at my current company. We use Teams at my last, but we liked that so much that we kept this channel open. After that, anybody could just jump into that channel if they wanted to like work together on something. In fact, we had a whole bunch of rooms that we created there, and anybody could just jump into. So one advantage I can see to this using Gather for that is, since you've got all these office areas mapped out on here, is I don't have to go hunt for people in Zoom and add them to a new chat or something. I can just walk my character over to that area if I want to pull them into a conversation or something.
Yeah, and just kind of roam over there and start chatting with them. I feel like it simulates the remote or the office a bit, but still, and I really wanted to call out this comment though, because this is, I think, the biggest benefit from this type of scenario and from working in office, and that people often overlook, which is just that when you're in person and you're communicating like that, even if you're just like, I remember starting out, it would just be like 4 of us programmers sitting in a little cube area, and somebody would go like, fuck, what the hell? And then everybody's in, whoa, what's going on? And go check it out. And we'd always learn something, right? We were like, hey, here's a problem. Anytime somebody got stuck on something, it didn't last. Like the benefit there was that problems didn't really like stick around, because you would see instantly that one of the other 3 people was having a problem, and everybody just kind of coalesce and usually have a good answer, or be able to kind of point them in the right direction. Where when you're remote, it's certainly, I would say it's much less likely that people instantly admit that they're lost, confused, or stuck. They'll spend, I feel like, a bit more time trying to figure out what to do next instead of just asking. And yeah, when you're in person, that becomes really obvious, because you just see them like sitting there struggling, staring at a thing like, oh, okay, we can tell this person is having a hard time. Like they're struggling with something, and you can get them right past it. So there's definitely that huge benefit and that kind of level up of being able to kind of watch other people actively work, which I think you also get, like you said, from pairing and mobbing too, which is another really great alternative to something like this.
Well, I used to work in a open office, which is kind of the worst of all worlds.
It is.
But
no defenses there. I work in open offices and they suck. Absolutely horrible. Any open plan, especially when you've got people side by side on different kinds of jobs, it's like, horrible.
But the one good thing that kept happening was, I don't like to wear headphones, so I've always had my ears open, and people would start talking about something, and then I'd realize it's relevant either to what I'm doing, or I can help them in some way, and I would just be able to jump into that. And I have no idea how to replicate that scenario in a remote, environment.
Yeah, this thing, I feel like you almost can't. Even with like a gather scenario, it's still probably not. You're not going to get that same thing. You get kind of closer to it, but I feel like it's tough. So everybody just has to go back to the office. I guess that's the conclusion, right, Story? Everybody needs to work in an office. No more of this remote bullshit, right?
Yeah, exactly. People like me who've worked remote for 10 years were wrong. We shouldn't be doing.
Where's Elon?
Yeah, the truth is that the kind of asterisks I just want to say on that too is that, like, when people talk about the idea of being remote or having like the freedom to do stuff, they often think of it in terms of, I won't get bothered, I can work on stuff, I can make my own schedule. But the parts that people leave out are all of the other parts that are the internet. For example, it's also easier to fester on ideas and panic. It's also easier to feel that it's better to disguise the things rather than bring them out in the open, because you're not looking, basically it's better to dehumanize people. Not in a like mean way, but in a like, once you've detached yourself from this being, we are all people trying to solve something, to there are words, and if I say the right words at the right time, I can progress, or I can hide, or I can obfuscate, or I can convince people this, that, or the other. People start to play the metagaming. And this isn't like any individual type of person. This is just what happens on digital communication. And so the point is, unlike other scenarios where you're just sort of socializing online, when you're trying to get work done, there's often a lot of pressure and anxiety in terms of like who's in charge of what. People are expecting stuff from you. You're trying to deliver on deadlines. You don't want to let people down in certain cases, or you feel like something's not working, underperformed. There's all of these tensions and stuff that's going on. And if the only communication is this idea of sending messages, people will often stay quiet. And you'll often find out, and I cannot count the amount of times I've worked somewhere where there's been a long lingering problem. Like someone is just like, I can't actually do this problem, and they've been hiding for 3 weeks that they can't do it, but they can't bring themselves to admit it because every meeting is just a positive 2-liner of how everyone's doing. And the idea of pulling someone aside is far worse than watching someone sitting at a desk struggle and being able to have that honest human communication, because you don't see each other as people until those meetings come up, and then panic kind of ensues. So to me, it's more than that the argument for meetings and offices is not this whole like company gets to watchdog over you. It's the fact that realistically people work better with people, and in a lot of cases being able to just see people communicate, and I'm not saying all the time, I'm a big fan of having like isolated spots, but like I cannot count how many problems were solved when I used to have a literal water cooler at a place I worked, and we would go to the water cooler, bitch about our job and what's going wrong, and either just like saying, somebody either knows the answer, or somebody is like, actually go talk to, and then points randomly at a desk somewhere, and you go down to them. They might have an idea for you. It's like, cool, I wouldn't have done that, but you feel more open to do that rather than going to another person in a different department in an email chain that you've never been, and it's suddenly a whole
or
thing.
messaging them and randomly and knowing like, hey, maybe they're busy. Like you can walk over and see like, hey, they're just sitting there fucking off. You can go ask them a question right away, or they're like deep in thought and like, I'll come back in a few minutes.
Even the first time meeting people, these are all things like, this is what frustrates me about programmer minds, because a lot of programmers see the world as academically numerically, this is a logical solution, this is an illogical one. They do not account for all of the parasocial stuff. Like people talk about, again, the business side of it and all that, but legitimately, unless you've seen it in person and it really like blows your mind. Like for me, it was a full on, I changed my perspective overnight, was when I was doing the math for me being sent to New York for a job. And I was like, I'm just being sent for 3 days to meet 4 people. We can have a Zoom call. I would never waste the thousands that they're spending to do this. It's such a stupid waste of money. And I was, I was like, hey, I'll go get to drink some beers and a bunch of people have fun, whatever. Like, I'm not going to complain. But then I was just kind of figuring out like why. Like logistically, somebody somewhere thinks this is a good idea. Like there must be some reason. I'm going through it all. And it wasn't until
they're crazy, right?
it wasn't until like I'd say 2 months later, I was working on some part of the project and I had some problem. And the problem was something that I was like, this really sucks. This is like a big issue. I have to like go back to somebody who has to redo a document that's going to end up taking a week and talking to somebody. And I was like, I reached out and I was just like, hey man, look, I need your help on something. This sucks, but and it's just like, wait a minute, I would never have written that email to that person had I not seen them drunk. Legitimately.
Yes, had you not hung out with them drinking. It changes that relationship, right? When you start to hang out together and see each other as people and hey, and not as crazy angry dogs or rough.
Yeah, the entire downstream effects is like, play that out in your head with every person you have to meet on the same project. It's the formal email, followed by the back and forth, followed by the, wait, what level are they at? Should I be talking to them like they're senior or junior? Are they my level? How much information do they know? Are they technical or non-technical? Am I being condescending? And you play this game back and forth for weeks until you eventually get to know each other. And even then, it's still got this air of formality. Even if you just have like, and it doesn't have to be drinks, it can be literally like, go play cards with them in the break room or something. Your engagement with other people will vastly change. And so that's what all this stuff is really trying to solve. It's that human nature of like seeing body language and discomfort and communication and understanding people and broadly empathy, which text allows you to strip away entirely and treat it like a video game. And programmatically minded people are going to start min-maxing their time. How much can I get out of the company? How little can I give in certain cases? And that's just unhealthy across the board. Because like I said, it teaches you to detach yourself from the projects you're part of, and you forget to see them as people. And it's not about meanness, or it's not about anyone actually trying to screw anybody over. It's that when they don't see it as people, they see it as a game, you start playing the game. If you don't see it as a game and you see it as a bunch of people trying to solve a problem, you see it as how can we solve a problem? It's just a mindset thing. And like there really is value in that. But all that aside, sitting in offices has more downsides for certain kinds of jobs than others. And so it's not a broad one way or the other.
And driving to offices is the worst part.
Yeah, like that one I'll never defend. The amount of money and time wasted for 3 hours going, so like, and that's out of our pocket too, which is like you're paying some of your wages to go to a place. You have to get up earlier than you would have. It has knock-on effects. Any job which takes you longer than 30 minutes to get to, I think you should get a free pass to work from home. But you should be forced to come in at least X number of days a month or something, maybe each once a week or so, just so there's like some, even if it's a non-work event, if you just have to come in and play card games and chat once a week, something that enforces people to engage in like a level so they remain seeing each other as people. But yeah, I totally get that.
Yeah. So a couple things here. She is 4 months old. There was a question about this wild puppy who just wants lots of loves. And Zach called you out, Story, for helping him in the student call earlier. We don't eat microphones. Apparently, the issue was exactly what you said. We were in the student call earlier for the multiplayer stuff, and Zach had a minor issue with his pretty cool racing game, and Storia, of course, just called it out, which I think is another benefit of being kind of in person and just working together, is that you see it's very easy to get stuck on a problem. It happens to me all the time with code stuff. You're looking at it, can't figure out what it is, and then somebody else looks for 2 seconds like, oh yeah, it's probably this. And you're like, oh shit, I looked past that line of code 20 times, or I didn't think to look at that method again. I thought of it last week and then totally forgot. So it helps a lot getting a second set of eyes, which is why I love that. And just pairing in general, working together on stuff. Let me switch tabs real quick. Did anybody else have any other thoughts on the remote work stuff before we switch over to my face getting eaten and performance?
Well, the only thing was, the article started off, I think, in COVID, right? And so that was a point where people were forced to be remote, and there was no option to be in office. And so I'm in a similar situation where, we are all forced to be remote because we're in different states. And so we still haven't figured out how to make the communication thing work. And so I am interested in these kinds of tools. Has anybody, tried it, and do we have any good ones that we can share?
Ooh, outside of Gather, I haven't really tried many others. And I mean, that one, it works okay. It's not like, technically it works great and it does the job. It's really just about getting the people to fit with that, right? To make it kind of work for the actual people that are using it.
I really don't like it. Like I like the idea, but I think Gather as a concept, it's too reified, right? It's this problem where they say, okay, we need it to be real, and so now it's like you have to walk to desks and do all the stuff. And like they have some friendly utilities, but the fact of the matter is, work is work, and you kind of want to get things done. And I just find the levels of extra stuff make it a toy that becomes more of a frustration when you're actually solving problems. If you're in a whimsical mood, cool, but like oftentimes the reason you want to contact a colleague is because you have a problem, and doing I'll walk over to their desk and then press the confetti button is so antithetical to my mood when I'm like, I have a bug on this problem. And yes, you can right click a name and say follow, but all of this stuff is like extra levels of twee niceties that I don't want at that point. So I find for me the answer is I just set up a culture with people where I'm like, hey, just Discord me, we'll chat. I tell people literally, as long as the little light is a certain color, just ping me and we can jump on a call then and there. If it's the other color, you can't, and I'll be back and I'll let you know when. Feel free to write me a message anytime and I'll tell you whether or not I'm back. I don't mind you sending me messages because I mute the actual notifications. I will on my own time check it every X amount of time, but I will recommend we have meetings during these hours and we can just jump on unofficial and not official meetings either. I don't do the whole like bucketed time thing. I just say between hours X and Y, anybody with a problem, DM me a message, and if we want to, we'll private chat, jump in, and if we think it's valuable, we'll ping the other people and do it that way. Again, that's just what I do, and I've tried stuff like Gather. I just find even Slack becomes more of a social network tool and becomes in your way with the amount of crap in it. When what I really want is communication, either by a group or one-on-one. That's it. Just problem solving.
Right.
Yeah.
We're trying the whole co-work idea of like, hey, at this time of day, we can hop onto a call together, or to a co-work channel. We're using Discord. And that's been kind of working okay, but it's, again, has this, I think they mentioned it in the article, it has this weird problem of, am I supposed to talk now? What if I want to go to the bathroom? So still haven't figured it out.
I really like it for conferences and events, but they're kind of the same. Like just a struggle with it with smaller groups and done. Like
I will say the events.
It doesn't support asynchronous stuff very well, right? Like your asynchronous communication, which is still going to be a good chunk of the communication, it just doesn't really handle that well. And then you've got two different communication paths, and it gets, I think, a little bit more confusing. Dog, are you farting in here?
To be fair, though, the event side, I'm a super fan. I think it's a fantastic tool for doing like online events. It's way better than a Zoom call because it allows for people to branch off, have little subgroups, and quite frankly, if you're bored of one topic, walk over somewhere else. I find that if you're
cost, right? You just wander off, like nobody cares that you went off to go look at something else.
Exactly, yeah. And just meet and greets and stuff too. Like the fact that it's so much easier to sort of, again, walk up to somebody and ask them questions. I found that a lot of people they're shy to walk up to people they don't know, especially if they've seen them on YouTube or something and not met them in person. But if you're a little avatar besides 70 other little avatars, it's a lot less sort of, it doesn't, again, it has the opposite of the effect I mentioned earlier, which it dehumanizes people, but in a positive sense there, because it basically brings everybody down to the same sort of borderline level. That kind of removes that extra layer we've placed on communication. So yeah, for if I ever did an event like that, like any kind of like a conference style online, I think it's way better because it's so freeing to just walk around and set up stuff and pull people aside to small groups and all of that stuff. But yeah. The actual work style I wouldn't use it for.
I still think Unite should have an online version. They should just do something. They should do something regularly and just have online conferences. It would certainly be. I would prefer that over Unite Unites that I have to fly to that are far away, and even probably over the in-person events, just because the accessibility for everybody else would be there, and you get the same benefit of being able to talk to all the people without the travel and the cost. And I mean, they can do them like monthly, but
yeah. I guess there's one last point on that I do want to mention, though, is just that, like, I really can't stress this enough. When I was just full-time programmer, when I was like classic cliched in my basement technical problem solving, I hated every meeting. Every meeting was an affront to my work time and meant nothing to me. It was often just hearing nonsense from people I don't care about things that mean nothing to me. In contrast, the minute I started to move up that chain into different roles, I started to appreciate, actually, to get my job done, I need information from the developers. I'm at a point where I am completely blind past this point of information, and I need that from others. And I can empathize that it's frustrating to be interrupted, but like the downstream effects is I've got these people asking me if this can be done for those people that'll cost this much money for this much allotment. And I'm like, I just need questions answered, and I need there to be a more open channel. And I need to know if there are these mistakes. I don't need it. Don't worry about it. I'll get it done. And then hear in 3 weeks that something takes too long because there's some blocking issue or whatever. I'd rather have a friendly relationship where they're like, dude, I know I told you this, but it's taking too long and I can't do it in time. Because at least if you tell me that, I can solve some fires further up the chain, right? And so just have empathy for the fact that some people do want these meetings, not to spite you, but because legitimately their job requires that. And if you can look at it more in that case, I find it much easier for me to be blunt. If you've got a manager who's too in your face, to like ask for time. It's like, look, can we make this, wouldn't you dislike it if someone kept interrupting you on stuff? How about we budget time that works for both of us? But don't assume just because they're interrupting your work that they're bad or that it's a bad thing. I think that's the problem. That's what I want to really focus on, is that it's so easy as a programmer to say, I just get rid of meetings altogether. But like, again, if you care about the project and you're willing to understand how many different people with different jobs have different understandings, you might have crucial information that other people need, and you have to be okay with being interrupted sometimes. It's not your show. It is an entire project, and sometimes you have to be on board for that. So again, don't write off meetings, write off bad meetings. It can be blunt when they're bad, but don't like write off the idea.
You become your own worst enemy.
So any of you are coming to Unite this year? There was a question about it.
There was. I am not going to be able to make it, unfortunately. I don't know if anybody else is.
I most likely will be there.
I would if it were a whole lot closer.
It's closer than the last year to you.
Yes. Just not much. They're so far away. It's a ton of travel. Oh, sorry. I had a giant a dog problem. I was afraid she was gonna just poop. She was just farting like crazy. Anyway, enough dog farts. Let's see. We got at least one other thing I wanted to make sure that we talked about today. I mean, there are lots of topics, but this popped up early. I think it was earlier this morning that I saw it, and I was like, literally this morning, 6 a.m. And it just kind of struck a nerve with me, and I thought it was worth reading out loud and talking about. Although I don't know if I have the breath to read it out loud after carrying that heavy ass dog up and down the stairs. Here, let's answer this question first before I try to read out loud from the bull. When is it time to fully remove an existing system or process and build it from the ground up versus continuing to patch it? So you got a system or something in your game, or maybe it's just the workflow processes. How do you make the decision to kind of axe it and kill it? I know for me, it's often a weighing thing. Like, what I'll do is look at the system that I'm working with, and if the cost for me to keep it around and keep using it is extremely high, like it takes a ton of my time, a ton of energy, or a ton of other developer time every time we want to do something, then the value of refactoring and removing that goes up. But I feel like you have to strongly balance it with the cost of replacing and removing the thing. Because I've seen, I don't know, dozens of times in my professional history where people saw something, there was some part of a game or some part of another application that they thought could be better. It wasn't great. It had problems and they wanted to remove it, and they didn't really think through the costs, and it would spend, many, many months, hundreds of man hours just redoing something for zero actual benefit, or making the thing even worse in the end. So like, you have to have a good plan and a good idea of what the end result is, and be able to at least closely estimate the value of replacing that thing before just making that decision. That's kind of where it is for me in that, but I'm curious, you guys have more on that? Like, have you guys seen the same thing?
Yeah, it's almost exactly what I was going to say. If the cost of maintenance is greater than the cost of replacing it, then yeah, that'd be a time to replace it. But like the same philosophy, if I'm going to get a new car, if the maintenance cost of my car gets to the point where it's going to be more than a new car payment, then that would be a good time to get a new car. But unlike a car payment, it's a lot more difficult to estimate the actual cost of replacing a system like that. So that's where the tough part is.
Yeah, with the car, they give you the price, right? With code, you're just guessing, like, I think I can do this with less CPU cycles, less human time between all these manual processes and stuff. But then you have to build it and then see where that actually comes out. Because often, I'd say probably half the time, it ends up just as bad or worse and then abandoned. So I don't know how many times I've seen a refactor to make something that was terrible good go on, and then 6 months later, a year later, that refactor is thrown away. Like, never mind.
I've been involved in a couple of those rewrites.
Yeah.
Well, but on the flip side, I really like the philosophy of planning to throw it away, because often you don't know where the problems are going to be, and so if you write it once and then you find all the problems quickly in a really dirty manner, then you can go back and write it properly, performantly, cleanly, whatever your goals are.
Oh yeah,
to avoid the issues that you hit along the way.
Well, that's the basic rule of prototyping, right? Always plan on throwing away the prototype.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I think that's that's the thing too, is that's a slightly different question, because there's the whole question of should you prototype an idea quick and dirty? Always, yes, that's a good idea. But if you talk about an existing system, when should I remove a thing in a game that's functional or working or that could be better? The answer, in my opinion, is almost always far later than you think, often never. And if you are going to end up replacing it, the way to do it is, because the underlying sort of concept with the existing system is, in order to break even, it has to have all the same features as the last thing. So all that work amounts to net zero, ideally. That's best case scenario. And even then, it's often going to be a lot of time, a lot of work, and you're going to end up getting in your own rabbit holes of redecisions and wasted time. And that doesn't even get into the whole idea that you're also going to get a lot of issues that crop up in the process of doing that when you're going to break something else. And so to even begin the process, there's this whole concept of working with legacy code where you need to define the boundaries of what's there first. And so the short answer is, to even begin the problem, what you should do is make an interface that represents the whole system as you understand it, then make a dummy version that returns the minimum numbers you need. This always says number 5 from the database. This always returns this. This always gives me a yes saved correctly. And then can you replace inline with the bad version? And just does it work fully if with fake information? And if you can't do that, then don't even try the whole process of downgrade, like the whole separate thing. You need to actually know the boundaries of the software first, because that's the real killer with this stuff. Is there's a lot of cross-cutting concerns often where you'll have people referencing things you didn't expect or code that does one thing a different way. And so obviously upfront architecture that supports change is usually a better approach. But yeah, it's always tempting. The way I look at it is not so much about a code question, rather than why do you have this feeling? Is it because it's icky? Is it because you've gotten better and feel like you could do it better this time? Or is it because it's actually causing issues? If it's actually causing issues, that's a different problem. And if it is causing issues, is it the primary issue? Or is there something else more valuable for now? And so on and so on, right?
It almost is. Right?
Yeah, right? There's always,
most
usually because I've gotten better.
So-
the answer
so-
is almost always that.
But what does issues mean, right? Because sometimes, like it's not, the piece of code is not causing actual bugs, but every time you try to change something, it's somehow getting in your way. So it's
Yes.
like a different type of productivity issue that is harder to quantify. And so I think sometimes it's hard to say like, okay, this is worth doing or not worth doing. What you can do for replacing these kinds of systems, I think you're alluding to it, is if you can isolate the part that you want to replace, first step one is, if it's not there already, throw a boundary around it with an interface. And then you can start, I don't know how the community feels about unit testing, but you can unit test that boundary. And then when you replace it, you just have to make sure all unit tests continue to pass.
Yeah, that's the gold standard. But obviously, it's pretty hard in a lot of cases to do that, especially if the systems are interacting with external collaborators. Then you have to start dealing with like how much of that you're testing and the integration tests for that too. And we're getting into hairy territory because, yeah, we talked about it before. But like I said, I'll unit test up until it starts hitting things like Unity systems, because once I get to that stage, you're either having to try to test a physics system, or you're doing the slightly better approach, which is isolating that out with some sort of collaborator. But now you're writing layers on layers to avoid having to talk to systems that exist. And it's like, at this point, you're paying a cost one way or the other. And so, yeah, I tend to keep it down to pure business rule portions of the code, which often are the things that change more often, but are also the things that are easiest to test. So usually they're the bits that I will isolate. But the stuff that's like implementations of stuff with physics or arcs, I will leave in Unity land,
Yeah.
I love this comment by Lurking Ninja of replacing bit by bit.
Yeah.
What I like to do is define at some point the place you want to get to in terms of how the architecture of the code should be or whatever, and then don't touch it. And then every time you put up a pull request for a new feature or whatever, move it just a little closer in that direction. Fix up like one thing that you've touched and is nearby what you've touched, without having to go and do this massive refactor that breaks everything.
Yeah, and one thing that could really help with that too, by the way, is just this is one of those like an architecture understanding thing that as you get more used to it, starts to solve a lot of problems. A really good example is I was working in Angular 1 back in the day, and I was trying to figure out my boundary line for my application, and I hit the very common issue of validation, where it's like, oh God, this is a cross-cutting concern across my whole application. Anytime a user validates an input box or has an error on a form filled in, how in God's name am I going to like make sure everything knows how to send events and subscribe to events? And I was going, okay, I'm going to sit down and plan this for a week. And then I downloaded an example project from one of the Angular things. They're like, well, you see, we have this service called messages, and then all these things add messages, and then this thing reads messages. And that's it. It's like, oh, that actually works for all of my cases. And the reason why it works is because I'm not having to like build a constructor or a method contract which has event lists or not event lists or when or when not to. And this gets into the idea of collaboration, and that the contract of your application could be a lot simpler than the actual requirements it has. So for example, with this stuff we're talking about here, if you're trying to figure out this factory doesn't take a list of this and has all this, what if there's other stuff over here and you say make, and make can request stuff? Now you can isolate each system in different portions. So this also becomes an architecture problem as you scale up, is that understanding what is the bounds of the requirements of the system you're in. And the reason a lot of people hate that idea is they often make super tightly coupled contracts where this thing requires you to pass in these two things, and then down the line it requires a third thing, and so they have to rewrite the contract, which then ripple effects breaks all the code. And that's not a problem with the philosophy. That's a problem with understanding about where those boundary lines should be and how much information needs to cross those boundaries. So the better you get at understanding that you can do command query separation, that's the kind of asterisk term for this. Once you get into that phrase of thinking, you can go, oh, actually, this can be a lot simpler. I don't need to define as concrete early on. I just need to know roughly the boxes where things are and know who gives who which box to talk to. And that'll make a lot of it simpler. But if you find yourself struggling with this, the answer is normally because you're putting too much information into those contracts and the like sets and gets and passing around. So you should simplify those. And yeah, I'd say look into those kind of concern separation stuff for that.
Speaking of that, Uncle Bob is kind of famous for the clean code book, right? But I couldn't get a few pages into it without having to put it down because I disagreed with it so hard. But he is also known for, he also wrote a book called Clean Architecture, and that one I actually really liked. Which the boiler point for me from that book was about this, that you should think about architecture as dependency management. How do you decide what should depend on what, and how do you isolate your components so that the things that are depending on something else are the ones that are easily replaceable?
Yeah, I like the way you talked about flow of control a lot. That book was very much literally like, which directions are your arrows going? As long as you know that, you'll have a better time separating things out.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it was definitely, I think, probably my favorite of the two. Although I did like clean code too, because even though I disagreed with some of the code in there, and I really hate Java in general, I felt like there was a lot of just good info and just a lot of common sense shit in there that you just don't think about a lot, and see a lot of the opposite of when I'm actually working in enterprise code often, even in some game code too.
Well, my hot take is actually I really loved clean code when I first read it, but my asterisk to that is that's because it was one of the first proper programming books I read, and I don't care about any of the code examples in the book. What I liked about the book is it was the first time in my life I had read something where someone had basically said, this is a craft. Think of what you're doing as a craft, care about it. Think about the decision making, why you're doing what you're doing. And beyond that point, I was kind of like, I'd kind of zoned out of the book at that stage. I was just like, oh God, yeah, actually, that's a good point. And now I'm just reading one person's opinion on what those philosophies are. But now that the like seed was in my head that why did I call this function? Why am I using IVR interfaces? What is the point of this IEnumerable word? Why is that person choosing to return an IQueryable versus IEnumerable? It's like, oh, I now care about the question. So that book changed the way I think about programming. So that's why I really appreciate it, because I think it's the first time I was like, people are going to read my code. If I show it to other people, I'm actually communicating with them. And so that's something I have to communicate. And now I'm like, the way I chose variables is different because I'm aware that it's using my own internal meme jokes, languages, and references. Like just
so
having
helpful.
that, like, having this like, oh my God, other people, this is the point of this is communication. It completely
they relate just like the characters on the show, right?
Yeah, and write your code like the person maintaining it is a homicidal maniac who knows where you live.
It certainly helps, yeah.
So I agree with Alon too. Is it Alon or Alon? How do you pronounce that?
It's Alon.
Alon. Yeah, so I agree that about being a good citizen and trying to move your code a little bit, make it a little bit better every time you touch it. And another opportunity to do that is in code reviews if you're on a team and looking at other people's PRs and looking for opportunities to clean things up.
Yeah. Like they get called out less in PRs, but yeah, it is a place, a good place for them.
It's a tough balance in PRs because you don't want to derail the feature or people's work.
Yeah, approve with suggestions. Don't block the PR because of a disagreement on how they architected something.
Yeah, I've seen some where it was just a long discussion instead of actually talking about what was actually going on. They're talking about random other shit in the code or random ways things are formatted. But I've also seen some really bad PRs that probably should have been declined and were still allowed with horrible variable names and stuff, where I didn't have the authority to veto those. Anyway, let's, if you guys are up for it, jump over to this Uncle Bob post. I wanted to just read through it and get everybody's opinion. It was in reply to this blog post about the lack of falsifiability in programming culture, which was this long thing, or it's not even really that long, but this didn't make nearly as much sense to me as Uncle Bob's post. So I figured I would just go through this. And like I said, I saw this morning. I woke up and it popped up right on my phone. I was like, oh, this is actually pretty interesting and pretty true, although I think there's some things to talk about. They said in the 1950s, an hour of computer time was worth more than 10 hours of programmers' time. Therefore, programmers expended enormous amounts of effort to conserve every CPU cycle they could muster. As Dijkstra said in The Humble Programmer, in those days, many a clever programmer derived immense intellectual satisfaction from the cunning tricks by means of which he contrived to squeeze the impossible into the constraints of his equipment. Which sounds like it was like Carmack's entire life. So programmers in those days were like the free men of Arrakis. They fought and scrambled to conserve every last CPU cycle. Today's programmer does not live on Arrakis. We live in a world where water gathers into great oceans and falls liberally from the sky. Let me make this bigger. Everybody can read it and not just see my face. We can afford to take showers and let the water flow down the drain. An hour of programmer's time costs more than decades of computer time. The economics of the situation no longer favors CPU cycles. Now that those economics favor programmer hours over program efficiency by a huge portion, or now they do. If having a program efficiency will increase programmer productivity by 10%, it's almost a certainly good economic trade in a significant majority of applications. And I think you have to obviously caveat that with those. It's only in a significant, not in all of them. And it says computational resources are now so vast and so absurdly inexpensive that we can effectively trade programmer efficiency against CPU efficiency in order to build applications that are as fast as necessary, but no faster. That trade allows us to minimize the cost of development and maintenance. Do the ideas of in clean code help this trade-off? Do they increase its economic viability of programmers? The only hard data we have on this is the economic success of the book and the concept in general, and it's been prejudiced. Anyway, it says, so I guess the thing to falsify is whether the economic success of an idea is related to the validity of the idea. And I think that part is a little bit less interesting than whether or not the whole thing is actually true. That
before you get into debate, and you should probably steel man the other side of the argument that he was responding to. You don't have to read the whole thing, but I'll give you the bullet points of what the other side is saying, and also why he made the joke at the bottom about falsifiability, because that's the literal point of the original thing. Yeah. The idea is compute. So you can look at it as software as an industry. It's huge, touches everything we work on these days, and it's very intrinsic to how we work. And you have to look at how do you think about software and what are you doing with it. And the broad argument has been, up until kind of now-ish, it has been often that programming is just, people just write code. There's no standards body officially, there's nobody going to slap you on the wrist if you do it wrong. But if you're doing building wrong, you're going to get a lot of complaints from a lot of people. There's lots of people you have to talk to. There's lots of standards you have to abide by. Code is just, you just write code and see what happens. And then the question becomes, how do you start to build a craft around this? How do you start to structure it? And Bob's argument way back when he was much younger was to say that if we don't standardize ourselves, somebody else will do it for us. At some point, there'll be enough deaths, enough issues, enough something, and somebody will come along and go, you people aren't managing your own stuff. We're going to do it for you. And there'll be a standards rule book that may not understand the craft itself. So that's always been his philosophy of generally broad, be a good citizen, blah, blah, blah. Now you can argue about the specifics about why he thinks certain code standards, but that's a separate argument. So that's step one. What the article is saying is this philosophy has moved from the reals to the feels. And a lot of people pass around books like Clean Code with the idea of what feels good, what sounds good, what do people like working with, what's tidy or well written or reads like prose, these famous quotes, which have merit, but can be also read as they're non-scientific. There's a lot of people talking about best practices from a business lens, because a lot of this stuff trickles up to businesses, which start talking about things like, getting into agile approaches and then moving on to Scrum, and it suddenly becomes an industry in and of itself about this managing expectations that's suddenly so far removed from the code that we've lost the ability to look at code and go, what's objectively better? That's kind of broadly the falsifiability argument, is that in science, stuff can be rigorously tested. In code, there's a lot of, well, it does the job good enough, ... And people don't really think about things at a grander level. So I have my own thoughts on both, and I think both are wrong, and actually have a completely different opinion personally. But before we get to my side, I just want to say that the broad arguments here is that computers are fast enough. That's not where our concern should be, is what Bob's saying. And the other side of it is nobody understands how it works anymore. If you actually understood it from a mathematical standpoint of what's good or bad, you would have a better understanding of what code to write, and things would be better overall. So they're both valid points to make. So I'll leave it to the floor.
Yeah, and I guess I don't want to speak for Uncle Bob, but I guess my paraphrasing of his argument is that you have to define what better is. And if better is just that the energy use went down a little bit and nobody noticed, that maybe that's not better. Right. So, but yeah, I'm curious where everybody else is on that. I mean, obviously, and just for everybody actually everybody in chat, if you have thoughts on this too, just let know which one do you agree with. But I think it's important to call it, there's some people in there, like they have high scale, high performance problems, and that is always going to be the case. And I don't think that that's specifically what he's calling out here. He's saying in most applications, which is the case. Most applications, 9 out of 10, probably 99 out of 100 when you include all the internal business applications and shit that run. Most of those performance is not the bottleneck. It's not the CPU speed or the performance of the application. It's the timeline of getting these new things to the manufacturing floor or wherever else needs the software to use it. It's not that it needs to be milliseconds faster.
I don't know if it's useful to talk about these arguments in such a broad term of like all of software engineering, as opposed to, there's different fields that have different requirements. And if we're talking about games, like performance totally matters. Every project I've worked in, I've had to deal with a lot of performance issues.
Oh yeah.
And so I think it's a bit of a false dichotomy. It's not like I want unclean code in my games. Just because I want performance. And it's not like I want to throw away performance because clean code is making me so much more efficient. I think there's a balance here. And it's also, there's other factors that are not mentioned here. Like, there's the clean code is not the opposite of performance. There's also how flexible is your code? How well is it easy to change? How set up is it to run in parallel? All sorts of things that, I don't know. This argument doesn't make sense to me in general.
Yeah, I mostly agree with that. We had this discussion before when people were saying you don't need clean code anymore, and that clean code actually leads to less performant code. And I know even Story, you did a whole video about this. But so like in my day job, there are some areas of the application where performance is really something we have to focus on a lot. But it's usually around like getting data out of SQL Server and stuff, analyzing execution plans and optimizing those queries and stuff. But the biggest cost that I've seen at my job is where tech debt is slowing us down from being able to deliver new features, and also just the fragility of the code because of tech debt. And that's a case where re-architecting with some better clean architecture would have enormous cost benefits, and it wouldn't negatively impact the performance of the application.
I want to talk about this comment Lurking Ninja made too, which said what Bob's saying is that it's okay to rob the user wasting their CPU cycles and electricity in order to make the company's life a bit easier and make more profit. And I oppose the sentiment. And I don't think that that's, there's obviously some benefit for the company, but I think that it's also missing the benefit for the user in that you're going to be able to get these fixes, updates, new features, new functionality faster. So it's a trade-off of how quickly do we ship and deliver new features and functionality versus how optimized is it. Now with games, you mentioned it, we're all pretty much always having to optimize stuff because we always kind of want to target the lowest possible end device that we can. So we want to get the best performance as possible. And there's always a little bit of room for it, but there's still, if depending on the type of game, there can be a ton of value in the architecture being extremely flexible so that you can update and change it. And there is still a bit of a trade-off where you're probably not necessarily trading off CPU or GPU performance in your actual frame rates, but you may be making small trade-offs in other areas of performance, like loading, saving, other things that are slightly less impactful in some cases. But in general, I think, like you said, performance on the end user thing for an actual game is important, as long as you're hitting the specs too. But also, once you're hitting the min spec, if you have a specific targeted device and you're only on consoles or something like that, then I mean, you're still optimizing like crazy, like, just to hit that. But after that, it doesn't matter. And I think that you don't necessarily have to have one or the other. You can have good, clean architecture, good, clean code, and optimized performance on just about any game type, as long as you paid enough attention and separate that stuff out well. I don't know. It's an interesting.
I don't even follow the argument, because there's, like, I've never looked at a performance trace and been like, there's too many virtual method calls. It's always been something like somebody's creating a list when they could be reusing one. Or, there's little things that if you just like follow the rule book of like, don't do this for performance reasons, then you don't hit those kinds of issues. And then there's the more fundamental of like, are we using Electron as our engine for our application? Which, yes, that's going to but that's not a coding style architecture question.
Well, I've dug to the depths of both sides of these arguments, as in I have watched about 100 hours of Bob's actual hour-long videos of how he describes what he means by these things. And I've watched about 40 hours or 50 hours of Jonathan Blow and the likes of Casey, who are talking about this stuff at length as well, so that I can steel man both sides of the argument. And the takeaway, and this is why people ask, like, what's my stance? The reason I am on the Bob side more so is simply because both are wrong, but in the percentages of how you engage with it, it's much easier to defend the I don't like slow things, so things should be fast. That's such an easy argument that it doesn't require much defending. The other side has a lot of benefits that aren't as clear, and I think it does need someone to bring those to attention. For example, whenever I see the one that says clean code, etc., is for the devs, that's a fundamental misunderstanding of the problem, and that's why I'm on the side I'm on, because someone has to point that out. I can give a very clear example from a literal project I worked on, which is a contractor came to us because their last contractor didn't do the job. When they showed us what the last contractor did, they explained the problem, they were like, we need a fancy particle effect system that's like an Instagram filter. And the other dev had gone and spent 3 weeks and wrote a super fast GPU-driven particle solution that did not look like the client wanted. And when they asked for new features like circles to be rendered a certain way, they're like, oh, it can't do that. I guess I can put a few more weeks in and add those features. They came to us, we opened the Unity Asset Store, spent $40, bought something that's horribly slow and inefficient, and did exactly what the client wanted, and they were the happiest people you've ever met. And so my point is not this argument of A or B, and it's a fallacious argument, is that if you're purely going raw, this is why I keep saying it's more of a people problem. The mathematical nerd type, the kind of I'm a programmer, academically, 100%, things are slow, things could be faster. If you understood the architecture better, you could write more efficient code. That's not even an argument. Nobody's saying bad things are bad, good things are better. It's like, sure, yes, everyone is 100% in agreement. That's where I think people miss the argument and on Bob's side, the other way around. He keeps hearing that argument so much, he's gone and taken the shoe horse theory the other way and says, computers are too fast, doesn't matter. That's stupid as well, for very obvious reasons on both sides. The real argument is to say that people are talking about the wrong thing. What we're saying is there's a noticeable dip in quality of actual experience using software. Let's forget the hows and whys we got there, but the fact of the matter is a lot of software sucks now. It's slow to open, it's frustrating to use, its features aren't matching user expectations. It's just crappier than it used to be. A lot of software used to be clean, simple, did the jobs you wanted. Now, you can argue whose fault it is and where it came from. And some people are saying, well, it's because everything is decoupled away and nobody knows it, and so people are writing crappy code. It's like, well, that's part of it. But my understanding personally is it's because we're not thinking as users. And this goes back to both sides. Businesses are thinking about solving business problems, and programmers keep looking at bits. And everyone in the entire system is forgetting somebody somewhere sits down and uses the software, and they're not thinking about it like software. And the complete gap between the user experience teams and the UI teams from the programmers is bigger clarification of this to me than anything. The amount of times where both teams don't even talk to each other. And these are the people making the actual thing that people click on and use. So I think if you really care about this argument, things like speed comes up. Speed is very important, but not speed arbitrarily for the sake of speed. Speed in direct proportion to how it negatively affects the user's use case of what they're doing. If I'm building an app and it's slow to search, the answer is we better improve search. How do we improve search? Maybe a caching layer. And then you keep going, and then by downstream, you might be realizing maybe our save format's horrible. We're using JSON here when we could be splitting this up into this, this, and this, and then putting it into here, and then having a multi-cache layer from you can get there, but as it directly solves a user problem face down. And I think any of these conversations usually boils down to, I've used this metaphor a million times, blind men and the elephant. And this is the bit that I think people really, really miss here. People think there's a right answer and a wrong answer. But like the blind man and the elephant metaphor, a bunch of people could be standing around an elephant and they're blind and they say, what is this in front of you? And one of them says, it feels like a wall. One of them says, it feels like a rope. They're not wrong. They're both literally objectively correct from their perspective of what they see. And the problem I see is you've got people who have never worked in business side, have always been on the technical programming side, just forget other people exist and the requirements exist, and there's pipelines and money and there's loads of concerns, and they look at all that stuff as getting in the way of the problem of writing the clean, perfect code, forgetting that nobody plays your code. The code is a part of a product, and the product is what matters. And the opposite is true as well. There's business people going, can you just press the magic code button and make the damn thing work? Stop messing about with all your bits and performance. I just need a thing I can give to the clients. Both people are stupid because there's no empathy to the fact that this is a collaborative effort to make a thing. And so it isn't either of those problems. Both problems are basically this mistake, this kind of thing that everyone's blaming as this amorphous problem, when the real problem is people are forgetting it's user down. It's always user down, and it should start there, and we should make good things and remember what it feels like to use good things and make things more that way. And we'll get there. If we actually care about businesses, we would get more performant. But if you start talking about performance, it's like trying to introduce your friend who's never played a board game by starting with like a custom D&D session. You're an idiot if you're trying to do that. If they've never played anything game related at all, their entire world is different. It's like you need to start to engage people on their level. And this is the point, is that people are talking, programmers are trying to think in terms of bits when these people don't even know why that's important. And these people are trying to talk in terms of like products and selling when they think, oh, we don't care about that, it's about this thing. But yeah, it's all mainstream. If it's not a good product, it won't sell. If it's not efficient and it doesn't work on the platforms you need, it'll cost too much to scale. These are problems that all same thing, but nobody is willing to communicate with each other. So TLDR, it's neither of these. It's actually, these things will come as they go. Whatever's important will come out of the project as a result.
I think you're 100% correct, Story, but there's also a bit of nuance on the requirements for these customers. So if you have customers who are running your Unity application and they are on big fancy rigs, of course they don't care if your thing is a little bit faster because they're on big fancy rigs. But then you got that customer who's using a Steam Deck or some low power device, and they care. And so you have these conflicting requirements from different users, and it becomes much more difficult to decide point to point, am I going to make this part performant? Am I not going to worry about it? And so I do think that there are some guidelines that people can follow to say, okay, I know this is going to be unperformant to some level if I do it this way, and I know that there is a pattern to do it another way that maybe can, improve the performance significantly. And so I'm just going to always do the other way, even though it's maybe a little bit more cumbersome.
So are there any you can think of that are kind of generalized that you would call out right now?
I mean, it's for example, a lot of people say don't use link in Unity. Because you're just going to be creating a bunch of memory, and if you just write things out in a in a regular for loop, or you reuse lists that you have as private variables, like that's not stuff that individually usually matters, but in aggregate they affect the performance of your application. And you're not going to get customer feedback of the customer feedback from me, like on some devices something is kind of slow all the time. right? And it's not something it's going to be annoying to go back and try to fix afterwards when you have to go and hunt down all these places that are doing it the wrong way. And so I think that there's a balance between, yes, you need customer feedback. You also definitely need to be using the same devices that some of your customers are using with like a wide variety of hardware and everything. But then you also want to have these good practices so that both you're doing clean code when it matters, and also you're doing performant code when it matters.
Yeah, you should know the difference of what you're doing and the kind of consequences. That I 1000% agree with, is that if you don't know, you can't make the decision. And a lot of this comes down to one side or the other going, this is the right way or the wrong way, when the fact is just knowing what's in your toolbox is useful. Such a small thing, for example, the amount of times I see grid-based games build a giant grid, but what if it's a uniform grid where literally the entire grid is all ones or all zero for whatever you're doing? You can just store the number one. So I'll just have a guard clause on my thing saying if grid is uniform grid, I won't even allocate the memory of a 50 or 100 by 100, because why would I need to when I literally can store the exact information as one? And the first time something is assigned, I'll allocate my sized collection. Or if it is a sized collection, I allocate the entire collection as a flat array grid with the size I need, and then it's all contiguous memory versus doing it in sort of either a more complicated structure or, or lists, allocating the wrong list size, because you're adding stuff to it. So why make a list that only starts at 8 and then add and have it double every time and move memory when you can basically say, I'm going to put 100 in. So knowing how this stuff works is very important. I agree. And it is just, if there is shorthands like that, I will do the same. Like I'll almost always use for loops in game engines. I'll use for each sometimes, but I'll almost always use for, and I'll favor it unless there's a very good reason not to. So there's lots of these little shortcuts I will make. But I just think philosophically, the argument, like I said, is downstream. Like, because if the answer is this is slow, I always go back to search, because search is such a common one. You're searching all of the time in lots of things. The way to solve that could be make the data smaller. It could be make a caching layer. It could be, do I actually need all this data? Or am I only could I return IDs instead of the full model objects? Like the answer to that is so many things that like, the question, if it came from a user-facing perspective, will give you much more insight. It's like when the test. Anybody who's ever done a programming interview or something will have gotten the inevitable, how do you search this collection? And the real answer, the question that we're looking for, isn't use quicksort or whatever. It's what's your problem? Because a real programmer knows the answer is it partially sorted? Is it not sorted? Is it going to contain? And then you pick the right search algorithm to match what you're doing. So the answer isn't actually what's the best way to do it. The answer is what's the problem? Do you understand my problem, or are you willing to go the lengths required to understand the problem? Which is why I keep going back to the user thing. It's not just about end user experience, but the user indicates the experience to be had, which dictates the business rules, which dictates the requirements, which dictates where the effort should go to make those requirements a reality. And that informs you downstream about where, and you can do this before you build everything, but you can kind of stop and go, actually, this is vitally important. So we're going to go with a whole lot of people research memory or platforms or something on that side. And over here, we'll make shiny UI if we need to. But yeah, so that's what I mean when I say user first, because I think user first informs everything downstream.
Yeah, it's I don't know. It's a fun conversation for me. I feel like my mind never changes. I don't know. I think also Alon's comment on just simple things like avoiding link, avoid anything that's. I'm curious what other generalized recommendations you would have, but I feel like there are quite a few of those, and if I spent a good hour, could probably come up with a good list. And now for that, also just to clarify on avoiding link, I would avoid it personally in anything that gets called more than once, anything that's not like a load initialize type thing, unless it's like in a prototype or something that I know I'm going to throw away. A lot of the times, I might end up writing a little link query for figuring out how to grab the data that I want, and then I'll just convert it over afterwards once I'm sure that that's actually the data that I wanted before I start to build up, storing and caching that data into something else. I usually grab it and then just do a quick refactor. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, but before we change topic, so if you have something, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah.
Well, wasn't Link optimized in newer versions though, to where it's not as non-performant as it used to be?
Yeah, but we don't have access to a lot of the new changes with Unity, so it models all the same problems.
Yeah.
When I used to work on a C++ project, and in C++, a big question is how do you pass variables around between functions? And so we were using shared pointers a lot, and we had this big debate on, do we pass shared pointers just as shared pointers, or do we pass them as const reference? And const reference, requires like 7 additional characters. It's annoying to have to do everywhere. You can, it mucks up the code, and visually, like there's no difference in actually, what it does. But somebody on the team said we shouldn't even have this debate. Const reference is going to make the application a little bit faster everywhere, and it's not that big of a deal. It's just a matter of, basically it's a formatting rule for everybody on the team. And if you can do those kinds of small things just from the beginning, then you never have to worry about this as being a problem. And there is a performance cost to copying shared pointers. And so it's just small things like that, but then there's the, if you're going to make a big decision, are you going to use a cache? You're not going to use a cache. Are you going to, optimize your search in this way or that way? Those are really hard, time-consuming decisions for everybody. And then you need the customer feedback to know where are people actually hitting issues? Where in the performance space do I actually see problems? And is it worth spending days going and optimizing this?
Yeah, I think that the part of that that's important for me is that whenever people are having these arguments, try to steelman the other side. Because I really do feel like a lot of people argue this as like, so I want to pick the good fast thing and they want to pick the slow. Like nobody wants the bad option. Like legitimately, like it's such a fallacious argument to go, well, they want to pick the thing that's actively slower and has no benefits, and I want to pick the good one. Which of us should we do? Like it's such a pointless, you're not arguing with anybody at that stage. You have to say, well, why do they think that? Now, you might disagree that there's a value in whatever time benefits they might think there is or whatever, or you might think that they don't understand the problem well enough. That's all perfectly fine. But if your argument is just that they're picking the bad one, it's just a pointless debate to have. And I think that there is merit in saying if someone doesn't know about a faster way, or they think the faster way is a lot of work, that's a good trade-off to say, maybe I'll explain it to them and maybe then they can have a different judgment call than I do. But a lot of it is not that I see. A lot of the argument isn't this one-to-one. Like a good example is I wanted to comment about one of the responses here, which is saying that wasn't Bob's argument. It was, again, about should they care about code quality or software quality or whatever. But my point is that is the conversation. Like it is that is another smokescreen where people are like, oh, well, he's saying we should just do slow stuff. Who are you arguing with? Who's the person who's standing on saying we should write the slow code? Who's that person you're arguing with? Nobody is saying that as an actual decision. What's really happening is it's a philosophy of belief. Who thinks that the trade-offs are worth it, A or B? And the point is, if you're coming at it from a realistic perspective that a lot of software never ships, and a lot of software that does ship, so a lot of companies fail because the software fails to be built. Yeah. So like you can argue perfectly reasonably that I shouldn't have to bake that consideration into my decisions of my code. That's a perfectly valid argument to make, but it's not valid to say that's a stupid position because it's slower, because you're looking at the problem with the blind man elephant thing where all you care about is does number go down or up, when realistically the real problem is our goal is to ship a thing. Will these decisions help us ship a thing? If you're actually holistically looking at the problem, you can at least understand the point of the argument. You might disagree in places, but it's infuriating that half of these arguments boil down to, well, they like the slow stuff because they don't really understand. It's such a pointless argument. Like, don't waste your own time debating a nobody that doesn't exist. Again, perfectly
reasonable. They like stuff.
Like, I fully understand both sides of the argument. I just don't like. I would put in more performant quote unquote code than other people might at that, but I will also not write off the fact that stuff needs to ship and that stuff is hard to ship, and sometimes cutting some corners to make it faster is better for everybody. Like, because it'll deliver faster, users get to try it faster. You can learn the whole validated learning concept of getting it in people's hands to modify faster means the end product is better. So it's so much. There's so many different variables, right? It's not just this stupid argument that is number good or bad. It's so linear, and like you'd think people who are so focused on maths would look at the problem in aggregate and realize how much more information is part of the equation. But frustrating.
It's hard to measure.
The greenhouse effect of writing efficient code or inefficient code.
One's got analytics and numbers that you can easily just change and watch them change. So
yeah, and that's why I said, like, to me, it's the philosophy thing of like, it's so easy to defend that, well, I'm on the side of the fast code. Like, good for you. Congratulations. That's like, of course it's easy to defend number better than other number. Like, I'm saying, in order to be able to really have an actual cogent opinion, you have to kind of say, why would someone believe something so stupid as writing slow code is better? There must be a reason. Not tons of millions of people in books and they can't all just be absolutely blind to see the smaller number. Why do you like the big? That's silly. Like there must be something more to this argument than that single bullet point.
I like big numbers, like bank account numbers, other things. Yeah, big numbers are better.
Exactly. Yeah, that's why entire industries are built, because the bigger numbers is just nicer numbers. Like that's clearly there's no belief or reasoning behind their thought process. You know? So my point is, and the reason why this also it's like a self-fulfilling prophecy, is the more you have to deal with people, the more up the business chain you get, the more managerial you get, the more problems you understand, the more perspectives you have to take into account, because the more people are shouting at you about more things, the more you're like, oh, it's not just numbers anymore. And so there's this like self-fulfilling thing that the more managerial you get, the more empathy you have for the scale of the problem, the less you care about the bits anymore. And the more everyone looks at the managers and go, well, they're all idiots. They don't really understand the number. The small one is better, because they don't realize that it's actually, as you go up that chain, you get more perspective on the fact that there's more things baking into that equation.
So there's a couple of comments I wanted to just quickly go over, and one that was actually like a simple technical question before we run out of time. I just popped this one up because I was just reading about Suicide Squad failing yesterday, which seemed like it still was an okay launch, but not great. And they said that Baldur's Gate 3 and Suicide Squad were released. I'm pretty sure the Squad's business people were very satisfied with their decision. Have you guys been following what happened there?
I thought it was a bad game from early. I watched some of the early footage, and it just like we can go into a public rant on that, but to me it goes back to the same thing. It's a user thing. People looked at it and went, "Oh, it's just a crappier version of other games." Like, well, then this isn't a programming problem. It isn't a microtransaction. These are issues, but it was already just a poorly executed thing. That, without going into a whole other side tangent, games have life cycles. Games jump on trends. It takes years to make a game. You're very likely going to miss the very window you're trying to like jump onto at the right time, and so it's. Again, people can use this as a bolstering point for their argument either side, but they're missing the bigger point, which is it's actually more of an argument of jumping into trends, making games soullessly for the sake of matching expectation, rather than engaging with a good product. It's got nothing to do with these mini arguments that are like, again, downstream from that.
But my guess is that Baldur's Gate is a bit more clean codey than your average, just with the scale and scope of that game and all of the systems and the way that has to work. My guess is that while it's obviously runs relatively well, I mean, not amazing, but it runs. I say it runs well, but I also I'm biased running on like a 4090 all the time. And
have you gotten to the third act yet?
And it ran okay on the Steam Deck. It was fine on the Steam Deck. It was good enough. I didn't have any problems, but that game, I didn't have any problems with it when I was playing. But
did
you get to the third act? Yeah. Did you check the third act?
Well, then the answer is doesn't matter. Your point's invalid, because that's where it gets really bad.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. The reason I updated my PC was so I could play that game, because it was too slow.
Yeah. But I mean, Baldur's Gate 3 still was giant success compared to Suicide Squad, and I think it's largely the performance, while it's important, less important than the actual execution, getting the game done, having the game actually be awesome and do all of the shit that it's supposed to do. Like that's most important. Second most important is the performance and not crashing.
Plus, I think, honestly, again, going back to intellectual honesty and having debates, do not, I highly recommend nobody use Baldur's Gate as a reference point in any conversation against anything, because if you actually understand the concept, the context behind this, how long it took to develop, the history of the team, how much experience they had in this genre already, how much money and confidence they have going into it, and how unlikely it is, and all the other stuff. This isn't like you can't use that as, well, they could have done A, or they could have, why didn't they just make another Baldur's Gate? It doesn't work like that. This isn't an intellectually reasonable conversation to have. They're not the same thing. They're completely different universes. And a game like Baldur's Gate won't happen again for a very long time. I'm not saying the studio won't make other games, but that is very much a very unique circumstance for a million different reasons. And it's not a fair comparison to anything else.
Yeah.
That's fair. All right, let's go on to the simple technical question. And then if we have time, maybe we can do that resume review. So how do you solve this scenario? Here's an easy Unity question. Let's see who wants to answer it first. Trigger gets triggered for an object that has a compound collider, multiple simple colliders making a shape, but the trigger is triggered for each of the colliders. What would your solution be? Who wants to take it first? So you got multiple colliders and you're just hitting that trigger call is getting hit multiple times because you've got those sub colliders on there.
Well, mine's inverted index. That's what I'd do.
Yeah. Anybody else?
I didn't catch that. What do you say, Story?
Inverted index. So basically, what you're really saying is I've got all of these things that map to this one thing. So the answer is you make a dictionary that's the one thing, or that each of the things that maps to the thing it maps to. And you can build that once as a lookup. And now anything that hits any of them, rather than using the thing it hit, you would say, send me to the lookup, return what I actually care about. And now you can have as many sized or scaled objects with as many subcomponents as you need, and it'll scale. Basically, this is what a lot of VR games do, where you've got really weirdly shaped things and you want to be able to grab them. You don't actually care about the weirdly shaped boxes, you care about the thing itself. So you make a lookup that consists of the vertical versus horizontal on that, and you just sort of say any number of boxes equates to these objects. So it's an index lookup.
Is the problem here? I don't know if compound colliders are triggered differently than other colliders.
Well, the kind of Unity solution is supposed to be that any collider activates on the object it's on, not up the tree, but you can send events up and down. And you can, using Unity's own systems, you can fire events up and down the tree to the parent if you'd like to. But I just find that gets messy later, especially when you got objects which are technically together, but may not be in the same tree or follow differently or whatever. I just find it.
I think the compound colliders automatically send it up the tree. So you have those sub colliders, if I'm remembering right. And then for each one of those, they send it up to the compound collider and then fire off the on trigger enter for that.
Yeah, but part of that problem though is that's fine on the object itself. But if you're trying to get a reference to the thing that was grabbed, you now have to say, get script on me, from script on me, get parent of thing that I care about. And you're having to know what level of hierarchy, or you're doing like 2 or 3 lookups to say each sub collider has a script and then each script has a thing that references that. Or again, it's just like there's 5 or 6 ways to do it. But from the little research I did, this because again, it's a common VR problem back in the day, and a lot of the VR devs I know settled on we could do all of these different like tree walkings or have event dispatchers, and the answer is, or we could just store them in a list where each thing ties to a dictionary key, and the dictionary key returns back the correct parent object done once built. You know.
Yeah. I don't like to use the Unity events for collisions. I prefer to do the physics myself. And so they do have this really nice physics.overlap sphere method you could use if you want to do the detection.
Yeah, that one's great.
Yeah, what about for a mesh though? So they're using a mesh collider. I mean, here it says they're using simple colliders, but I guess that would.
I think it would work the same.
There's an I know there's a method, I just can't remember what it is, that does the mesh one too. I needed a trigger to react to the incoming object only once. So essentially, like, say they've got a car, it's got multiple colliders on it, and they just want the trigger to hit only once. In that case, I mean, there are a bunch of different options that you could do. You can just, on the object that has done the triggering, just mark that it has triggered again, either that if it can only hit once, like it's a rocket, just tell it not to trigger anything else again. If it can only hit each object once, then you can keep track of which objects it's hit and then have it not process those as well.
Yeah, or literally on a hit, disable its collider. And so now it hit the thing once and it's no longer going to hit the other ones, right? So
assuming it's a hit once type thing, not just a hit each thing once type thing, yeah. But yeah, otherwise you keep track of the things that you've hit and just not process those hits and kind of invert where you're doing that logic, so that it's not on the object, not having to keep track of everything that's hit it, but instead keeping track of all the things that the hitting object has hit. I need to adjust my camera view so I can lay down and talk. I feel like I need to stretch out.
Yeah, there's a load of ways. Like there's stuff too. Like sometimes, depending on what you're doing, a simple hack is well, just have a giant collider that's not actually mapped to the thing, and use that as the trigger for hit the object, and then you can do whatever sub-calculations you want to like raycast the surface of something else, or do whatever, just like you can trickle it down. The answer to almost all of these is usually to figure out what level of work you need and divide it. And like same with parent stuff, maybe you do spatial partitioning and now you're doing less objects to check against and so on. So it's almost always the same thing, which is how do I make this less work as I go down the chain? How do I have less questions to ask? And usually a big collider or a list to look up, something that's quicker or shorter usually solves most of these.
Yeah. All right. Do you guys want to take a look at that CV real quick before we wrap stuff up? Or do you want to save that for next week?
We can check it, I think. We have a few minutes.
Okay, well, let's pop it up. So Dimitri sent this in, I think it was last night. And it's a pretty interesting resume looking for, I don't know if he's actively looking for game dev jobs, or just working on updating the resume, but I thought it would be interesting to go over it. So let's share it. We'll make it relatively big and take a peek. So a senior game developer, senior Unity developer, started when they were 13, published first game at 16, and worked in game development for a decade. And they've been working with Unity for 11 years. Personally, I'm curious what you all think of this intro, but I really liked it. Like just reading through it, I was like, okay, this is like, gives me good context. I know where you're at, and you can tell they're very passionate. You start at 13 and publish at 16, and you can get a good idea of the amount of experience just off of that paragraph. But I'm curious what you all kind of get the same idea, or
it's pretty solid.
It doesn't match. To me, it doesn't match the subtitle. The subtitle is Senior Unity Developer, but it opens with experiences from being a teenager.
That's fair. Yeah. But yeah, because I guess we got to get into what the actual professional experience is after that, right? But yeah, I guess the senior part, yeah, that's fair. Any other thoughts on that?
No, it's okay.
Yeah, and then so it continues on with the experience section, which is usually what I generally recommend, is have that right there so people can see your actual professional work experience. And he's got a game right here with the Steam link. You can go check out Party Animals, and talks about what he did there, which, I mean, it sounds like it was a minor part, and you can see just from the timeline there, it's a relatively minor part, but it does seem like he's able to go in there and fix the problem. The one thing that would make me a little bit curious about this is why it was so short, unless it was I might call that out in here, that it was just a short-term thing to do that one task, if that's the case. And continues on, Patreon creator, game lead, so led programming of a game that would be eventually released on Patreon, and then did programming for another game, and then asset store developer. So I think Alon's point right here about senior is probably not necessarily a justified one right here, just because there's, from what I can tell, there's no professional experience. It's all like working on, well, I mean, no long-term professional experience building and releasing a bunch of games. Although maybe this one is this? No, yeah, it says it's an indie game.
I admit, this is one of those like small internal things, but I tend to instantly hand wave over any of those terms anyway, because there's no like knight of senior development who gets the W at a certain point in your career. And people, you either feel like it's time for me to call myself that, or someone did once and you just internalize that as someone I respected called me senior once, so I'm allowed to put it on my resume now. So to me, it's like, it's such a non-thing.
In my experience, it's what they give you instead of a raise. Like, we're going to make you a senior developer. Here's your
like the title of CTO instead of money. It's like, thanks. It's like, am I going about writing that on my stuff? No, probably not. But yeah, it's none of that really bothers me. Even the opening portion is fine to me. It's like, it's fine, whatever. The only bit that I think really is a bad misstep so far is in the third paragraph. It's the statement, it's subtle, but this usually takes an entire team of people. Now, here's a thing. you can state facts, and you want to state as many facts as you like. We did this, it made this, these people played it. But you don't get to make a judgment call on the quality of the stuff you did. That's the whole point of the resume. You're stating the facts about what you did, and you let them come to the conclusion.
Yes.
If you basically are saying the equivalent of, I did all of this stuff, like it would take loads of people to do my job, you're basically priming that idea that it's like you're deciding.
Look at it and they think they could. Sorry, we froze.
Like, there's no way that runs that well for you. Yeah, but you're right. But basically, because what you're doing then is you're saying to you, this is the bar. Okay, cool. So you're going to be judged against this bar you've made for yourself. You're better off to just say, I did these things. If they match what you want to work on, cool. If not, I think they are good. I looked at their other stuff. It seems like they're confident. So I wouldn't, not a big deal. I just mean from a presentation perspective.
Yeah.
Writing things that aren't statements. You can make very powerful statements. Like, for example, as silly as it sounds, even against what Jason said earlier, I would have literally put, I know Party Animals is a popular game. It's a follow-up to a very popular game, and it has a lot of players. I would have put some numbers there about how many people it's been played by, or something big and lofty sounding. But someone who doesn't know might not know that's actually a very big title to be part of working on. So I would have put something there that's like numeric. It's not me claiming I'm amazing. It's saying I worked on this game. This game hit big numbers. And that implies I had experience working on a scaled project one way or another.
Yeah.
So you can put as many facts as you like, but just avoid saying anything that's like choosing how things should be interpreted, basically, is what I mean.
Yeah.
Well, I wondered why under assets for developer, he didn't say 2020 to current instead of to 2024.
Oh, good point.
Yeah.
And just put in there that it's current and he's still doing it. And by the way, here's the I'll put a link in chat for everybody to the asset store page too. They can go check that out. It's right here, and go check out what Jolly Theory's got up there. I mean, it seems like relatively qualified on the rendering side, and it would be a relatively good resume, but I think
there's one, and the one other, like the real, like, so all of that's just like presentation of how I'm thinking about how the person would come across. As an actual, like, if I was reading this as a resume to hire, there's a far bigger critical problem for me. This is the reason why I don't know if it would make it past that first page, even though the work is good, even though the video is good. The real problem is, who is this for? Because this basically says, I worked on these things, but I even having read the whole thing, I have no concept of what their skill is. I don't know what they program in, or how much, or what mechanics they use. Do they favor certain kinds of technologies? Because everything says I did stuff that worked on things that did stuff. There's not a single time where, like, for example, if you're talking to a technical lead of an existing thing, and you said, oh, I wrote shaders for game X. If I was a shader writer, I'd be like, cool. Which shader language did they use? What did they use here? Did they solve problem A or B? Or if it's programming, it would be like, I worked on the AI for this. I'm like, cool. Did they use Scope? Did they use, hierarchical task manager, whatever they did? And so the fact that it's got no technical terms in there is worrisome for me, because it basically just says, I did game stuff with things. And I would read that and go, I have nothing to go on here. And I could roll the dice and interview them, but this tells me nothing. If I had a few words in there saying I worked on a thing and implemented an X system that did Y to solve problem Z, I would then go, they understand these mechanics, they've used words in that era, and it means I can then at least gauge what their technology is. So again, I look at that, and my red flag is I don't even know, are they kind of confident in programming? Did they program some stuff? Did they, when they say AI, does AI mean to them, I did a state machine? Does AI mean to them, I wrote an entire from scratch custom implementation of something using whatever, like, with no implementation details, all I know is that they vaguely worked on stuff. And it's, even if it's good stuff, as we've said earlier, you can work on a team, and you can just be someone who worked on a team. It tells something nothing about your ability. And I'm not saying someone should write the whole history of what they did, but who's your audience? If you're saying I worked on AI because I want to get hired to work on AI, you need to demonstrate you know more than how to work on AI. You need to say, what did you work on? Same with shaders, same with everything else. So there's the like broad statement that gets you past the like person who's just saying, because without going into the whole big like technical how this works, if someone's hiring someone else to do the filtering, they're going to basically say, we're looking for someone who knows this tech stack, use this thing, and has this. And somebody is going to just basically skim to find those words and say, are they even relevant to put on the pile? And if you don't get past that phase, you won't get any further. So like, whatever you want to get hired for should be written there. I've worked in these frameworks, did this stuff, use this technology, because that's going to be what the first level of filtration is going to be.
Yeah, I'm thinking like this top part these first two sentences would be, or these other two sentences right here might be a really good part for that. Like if they're wanting to work on, and it seems that it's kind of heavy on the visuals and shader side, especially looking at the asset store, but maybe focusing more on the fact that they're good at that and that's what they'd like to do. They want to do more technical art and art side of the project, or if they want to do more AI stuff, calling that out there. But my sense here is that visuals and gameplay stuff are kind of equal, and I didn't see much for AI other than this one. So I mean, I wouldn't have even thought of them as AI just because it was such a small part, like you kind of called out. Would you put it up here though, or would you? Where are you thinking you would kind of put that kind of info?
I'm a big fan of one-liners for the actual job experience, state what the job is, followed by a list or a bullet point, just a collection of here's the things I did on it. It's like I like to be very explicit and say worked on this, did this, because to me it's actually less about them, it's more about me. There's this one life lesson I mentioned before, which is what you put on your resume are things you're willing to get hired for. Which sounds obvious, but it's not all. People will put stuff on their resume and hope to God that that's not the job they're actually hired for because they don't want to do that thing. And so for me, I want to be very explicit. I wouldn't want this to be my job. And so it either doesn't go in the resume or it goes specifically as I also know a bit of this if we need it, but I'm not like broadcasting that as my skills. I want people to hire for things I would want to do. And so I'm very clear on saying I did these things. I can do these things. If you want these things, I'll do these things for you. So that's just me for how I like to structure it. So I would be like, worked on this project, it had this many players or viewers or did this, whatever. Then I did system A, system B, did stuff, whatever. And if there's a unique technical problem, I would put it in brackets more as a hook for the interview to say, oh, we did this thing, we had to overcome an issue with whatever. And I'll be like, ooh, I'll ask about that in the interview because that's what something the interviewer will enjoy doing and gives me a good story I can repeat, So there's lots of like little stuff like that. But yeah, mostly I would just list things I worked on.
Yeah, I like the bullet points.
I think I agree. I think I agree that you want to put your goals somewhere at the top. Like why are you, what are you trying to achieve? And it needs to be more than, I want to get a job in the games industry. It's like, I want to work on X and grow my skills in Y, something like that.
I also think it's odd that he was a lead developer on a game for a year until almost a year ago last year, and the game still hasn't been announced.
Yeah, that happens. That doesn't surprise me too much. There's a lot of stuff that goes on behind the scenes like that. Yeah.
Yeah, you can't talk about what you can't talk about, unfortunately.
Yeah, I also can't screen share that game on the YouTube stream, apparently. It had an 18 plus warning.
I can see the name there.
Yeah. Oh, I misread the name. So, yes. Okay.
Personally, I'm a big fan of video resume stuff. I know some people aren't. All I would do is I would use a link shortener personally, just because I do think if you're, yes, someone will click it, but if you're going to like have a thing, I would try to get it. There's loads of like tiny URL type stuff I would use. But other than that, yeah, like I'm a big fan of visuals, especially if it's a visual field, right? If you're getting hired for something, you want to see what they're actually capable of doing. And this goes across the board, no matter what it is. Same with like code. If you're being hired for code, I would like to see some code. If your code resume for me is a video of a game you made, then I don't know the code that you did. It doesn't tell me anything. So yeah, the short answer is if a job requires visuals, show me the visuals. If your job is about being, an architect, I'd like to see something you architected. Like it's very seems simple enough.
I would also maybe, can you scroll up a little? The order of the experience seems to be upside down.
The skills?
Yeah, no, the experience.
Yeah. Timeline, yeah. It's backwards.
I think it is just messed up, yeah, because you have 2021, 2023, 2022, 2024. So it just overlaps.
Yeah, it's not really a timeline. There was overlaps, yeah, which is hard for an overlapping thing, yeah.
Yeah, it should usually be chronological order, like most recent to oldest.
Well, honestly, that's another thing too. Like to me, this is more of a user kind of a UI issue, silly as it sounds. The template you use is a timeline template when it's not really a timeline. I wouldn't have used the timeline template to describe a non-timeline series of experiences. I would have just had bracketed time. But
yeah, for me, one problem I see is he has skills with 12 years, 11 years, 10 years, but job experience is only 4 years, and with education you can up from 2019 to 2024. You have nothing. That's supposed 12 years of experience.
Yeah.
Even shortly.
Yeah, the problem is there's clearly like a sense of, you know, when you're young you got to fake it till you make it, but you can't overdo it. So like the keywords here of like senior developer, 12 years experience, and then you look at like the graduation date of 2022, it feels disingenuous somehow, and so it makes me it puts back
there's a feeling of padding. I definitely agree.
Yeah.
That's fair. Because I mean, I think that the experience alone, without the title and the extended numbers into, you know, why you're learning, still is good enough to get a job.
But something I said before,
should have just said Unity developer, and it had, you know, 6 years or 5 years or whatever. And then you mentioned that you've been doing it, you know, for 6 years before you were doing it professionally. You I think you'd get a little bit more value there.
But so something I mentioned before, we talk about like the meta of this, which again is why like it's different jobs from the business side than it is from the coding side. Something that stands out to me way more than any of that stuff, and I've literally said this in previous things, is a resume of someone who feels like a senior reads differently than the resume of someone who doesn't feel like a senior. And that first paragraph is, please give me a job, not I'm available to work. That opening paragraph, before I even read a single other thing, I was like, this already screams more junior. No matter what I read past that point, just the fact that it's like, hi, I'd love a job right now, is immediately like, and I'm not saying you can't have sort of statements, but what I'm saying is that anybody who's read resumes professionally to hire people already has this, like, if that's their job, if they've done resume reading, they have a good instinct immediately of like, this is before I've even read all the numbers, and I don't need to start doing the math on how long they've worked for. The vibe of this is very much like, I'm taking undue amounts of pride in stuff that I did that is smaller. I'm writing in a way that's like trying to big up certain things. My general approach is like, I don't know what they'll value, so I'm sort of being a bit kind of careful around like all of this, just the way it's phrased. Like that's just it's the energy of somebody who's like, I'm trying to put a best foot forward here, please. And that's fine. You're allowed to do that. But what I'm saying is like, that screams off the page long before everything else.
Which, I mean, to be fair, like you've got to do something as a junior to get a job.
Sure, yeah.
But I think there's a sense of overdoing it, and like you want to call out, here's what I'm already good at, and here's where I want to go, and make yourself appear very passionate. I think that's the way to go.
Yeah. I think they've got the passionate part covered. They just get the others in there. I'd be interested to see an updated version. If Dimitri does some changes, maybe we can go over and review it again next time and go over maybe ways that it got better or I think it's always fun to do these things, to go over those, and especially it's an asset store developer too. Speaking of asset stores, though, I've been using this sucker a little bit lately. Very cool. Super handy tool. If you guys happen to know who made it, tell them thank you.
Yeah, it looks like it was something like made by a cool guy, whoever that is.
It's right here. What were you saying, Story?
Well, it's like, you can tell it's something made by someone who's cool, so just it's a good art or something. I don't know what it is.
Yeah, it's super handy. It just lets you do an inspector on devices. So we're working on a little bit of device stuff.
It should land probably Monday or Tuesday that fixes some issues in Unity 6.
Oh, okay. Issues in Unity 6. I don't
Unity 6. I'd love someone to fix Unity 6. That would be nice.
They changed they kept the I don't remember which one. It's like rigid body or something. They kept the variable name. They didn't change that, but they changed the type of it, which is going to break everything that uses that component variable. They couldn't introduce a new variable or like obsolete the old one or something. They had to change the type of a variable.
Yeah,
they changed a lot of stuff, and lots of stuff is still not working. But I hope they will change it with the full release, not in the preview.
And if anybody wants to go check out the river stuff or any of those awesome assets behind Power right there, there's the link for Nature Manufacturer, the best nature assets on the store. Tons of good stuff. Either of you guys got in any of the current or upcoming sales that you're able to talk about yet? I don't know if there's any coming on. I don't know what the timelines are on those, but I haven't checked. And I know you're not the publisher sale this week because I double checked that.
Yeah. We will be publishers on a publisher sale in I think in holidays, so between the beginning of July and
Okay.
From now in next 2 months we should be in publisher sale. We should release an asset in 2 weeks, and we should be in some other sales in next 1 month.
Oh, awesome! So I have a new release update.
Yeah.
Anything for Virtual Maker coming up soon that you know of? Or you can talk about, other than the update?
Nah, I don't know if I want to talk about. We have pipelines on the agenda. Maybe whenever we talk about that, I can talk about our new CI system that we're building.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that would definitely be an interesting one. All right. Well,
I just want to give one shout out to an asset that, hashtag not spawn. That's not sponsored by anybody, but I had an asset recently that I tried out, Ultimate Editor Enhancer. And I'm super sold. I went from apparently I bought it in 2021 and never used it. It's one of the many assets I never got around to trying. And I put it into the project and I was like, oh, I'm just putting this in all of my projects now. This is fantastic. It's I won't go on a whole big thing, but basically the main takeaway for me is it's one of those assets that if you install it and just don't do anything with it, you'll already see a couple of small benefits just from it existing because it modifies a few small things. But the real thing is it stays out of your way. Some assets are like, oh, suddenly it's a whole thing. I have to deal with this. But this is it's invisible except for a couple of niceties. And when you go into the options, there's more options you can possibly imagine to tweak a bunch of stuff. And it's all the little things, adds autosave automatically, adds a history to your selection buttons, adds different options to the transform gizmo to change stuff, lets you take scene snapshots and go back to the previous, lots of just little things that I was like, you know what, this feels like made by somebody who uses the engine to solve problems and solves a lot of really small problems. I was instantly sold. It doesn't feel like an asset for asset's sake. I was like, this is good. I'm instantly all of my projects now sold.
Yep, I love it. I pitched it on here a couple of times when I got it in a bundle.
Yeah, I've played with it, but I don't remember falling in love with it. So I'm going to have to try it out again. It's been probably many years, so I need to go check that out. And also, quick link, there's the architecture course. Lessons are starting in 4 weeks. And I linked the Jason Story Discord that I still always highly recommend. Anybody wants to go listen in on some fun, intelligent conversations and random arguments about game development stuff. Go sign up, go join. There's a tiny fee to get past the spam bot, so you don't have to worry about spammers and his Discord, unlike every other single Discord.
We had our first bot. We had our first bot, which was about 3 weeks ago. One bot in 3 years or something. So I was quite happy with that.
Yeah.
I got rid of that pretty quick.
That is really good. Yeah. Somebody probably got hacked, is my guess, though. It's probably
literally, someone got hacked. It wasn't even, and I realized there was a technical bug for people who were a part of a certain tier. If you'd subscribed at a certain level, you were able to make links to join, but no one else could. And so I just closed that one loophole. It was like, okay. So we caught one bot loophole, and it was like, now we're fine.
Nice. All right. Well, I think that's it for this week. We'll be back next week, same time. Similar but even more interesting topics. Hopefully Yorai will be here. I want to get into mod discussion, talking about game data loading at runtime and stuff. I think that would be a lot of fun, but it'll have to happen next week, I guess. So thanks again, everybody, for coming out, and I guess we'll see you all later. Anybody got any final words before we go?
Nope.